Do you know what time it is? It's supernatural story time. And if you're easily scared, and even if you're not, there's only one thing left to do. Just turn off the lights, because these are stories that you listen to only in the dark. True and Terrifying Stories, Volume 10, Story Number 1. I was traveling through Sicily during the fall of 1992. I stayed in the gorgeous town of Taormina for one night at a cozy old hotel run by a German lady. There were some internal stairs leading up to my bedroom door and onward. As I lay in bed getting ready to go to sleep, I heard some footsteps on the stairs, followed by moaning as if someone were in a lot of pain. It sounded pretty creepy. I was thinking of getting up to see who it was when it stopped. Then suddenly there was a man's voice calling a woman's name with great sadness. Each time it called, the voice came from a different direction, from outside the window, from the internal stairs, from the ceiling, from the adjoining rooms. I was pretty nervous by that stage and just pulled the sheets up over my head. When I later told my Italian cousin's wife, she told me another great story. She grew up in Naples. One afternoon when she was a teenager, she and her friends went to a large park in the city. It began to get dark, but they didn't know how to get back to the gate through which they'd come into the park. Up ahead, there were two large trees. A man walked out from behind one tree, heading in the direction of the other. He was rather odd in that he was wearing a dark, very old-fashioned clothes, a top hat, and coat tails. They called out to him, asking for directions. It was as if he was completely unaware of their presence. He reached the second tree but didn't come out from behind it. The girls thought he was playing some prank, hiding from them, so they ran up to the tree to find him. There was no one there. Later on the same trip, I stayed for one night in a hostel in the French city of Montpellier. My dorm window faced a large, gutted derelict building across a small lane. During the night, I was woken up by the sounds of what seemed to be demolition work. It made a huge racket. Glass was being smashed, and you could hear brickworks being pummeled and toppling to the ground. At the time, I just assumed that they were pulling down the old building. I was annoyed that they do this kind of work in the middle of the night, but just dismissed it as a cultural peculiarity. The next morning, the other people in my dorm were commenting on the awful noise during the night. I walked up to the window expecting to see the old building completely flattened. It was exactly as it had been the previous day. Story number 2. I had recently graduated from college and was still living with my parents at this time. I had a job that required that I work late hours, so I would take my dog Seamus, a black lab mix, out for walks when I got home. The neighborhood they lived in was very safe, and I was never afraid to take the dog out alone at night. My parents lived right next to a set of train tracks and a large cemetery. But as children, my brother and sisters, along with our neighbors, would sled and play in the cemetery, so I was never frightened to go in there. I just thought it was a peaceful place to be. On one particular night, it was about 2 a.m. in late November. It was a very cold and brightly moonlit night. I was taking Seamus for a walk and had just gotten to the street that I usually walk down, which is right next to the train tracks and the cemetery. And somehow I lost grip of his leash. Seamus always thinks it's funny to be chased. It's like a game for him to run away. So that's just what he did. I was chasing him and he kept running for about a half hour, and I was very frustrated, cold, and tired, and was nearly crying at this point because I was afraid I would never catch him. Eventually he crossed the railroad tracks and ran into the cemetery through a hole in the fence that had been there ever since I could remember. Although I'm not afraid of the cemetery, this frustrated me even further because it meant he could run around freely in the huge cemetery, and then I didn't know if I would ever be able to catch him. At this point, I was crying and calling for him, and I dug through the hole in the fence and went into the cemetery. I was walking around calling for my dog, but I couldn't see him anywhere. I was getting really worried because I couldn't find him, and I was sure he had run to the other side of the cemetery. I was still crying and calling his name. Suddenly, I could hear him whimpering close by in the hedge near the fence. I was so relieved to have found him, and I ran over to where he was. He was sitting there shaking and whimpering a little bit, and his leash was tangled up on a high branch. I was bewildered by this, and at the same time that I went to untangle his leash, I began to smell a very strong scent of man's cologne. It was very, very distinct and smelled good. I looked around to see if there was a cologne bottle or something that would cause the smell, but there was nothing, and it was all around me. I never felt scared. I felt calm, and it suddenly occurred to me that a spirit had helped me to catch my dog. I remember instantly thinking that it was probably an old black gentleman. I don't know why I thought of him, but I did. There is no way that the leash could have flown up into that high branch that it was tangled in unless someone put it there. I felt calm and stopped crying. I said thank you several times out loud and took his leash and went home. And by the way, he was the dog catcher for the town. Next story. When I was a little girl, my family and I lived in a ranch-style house complete with a basement in a small town in southeastern Michigan. This was around the late 80s. My older sister and I were the only two family members that had multiple encounters with a spirit or spirits. To this day, we believe these spirits to be dark and sinister. My sister's first encounter happened in the dead of night. Our mother and father were sleeping in their rooms, our older brother was sound asleep in his room, and we were both fast asleep in our room, when my sister Laura heard a loud banging in our basement directly under our room. Then she heard what sounded like the shuffling of toys from one side of the basement to the other. She then heard the basement door open and the sound of someone walking up the stairs. She claimed she was frantically trying to wake me up, but I wouldn't budge. She then heard steps in the kitchen and down in the hallway leading to all of our bedrooms. Footsteps stopped, and a second later the door handle turned and the door opened. That's when my sister started screaming, "There's a ghost in our room!" Her blood-curdling scream ended up waking everyone, including me. We all ended up sleeping with my mom and dad that night. A few months later, my sister and I were sleeping in our parents' room with our mom. My dad had a temporary night job, working security on the weekends. During the night, I woke up at the side of the bed closest to the door and dresser. Standing in front of the dresser was a large hooded figure with a large bag slung over its shoulder. I couldn't make out the being's face or even locate any body parts. I tried to roll over to my mom so I wouldn't be so close to it, but I woke her up instead. She told me that my sister Laura had just rolled over because she saw a ghost. I didn't tell my mom what I had seen. I just rolled over her and slept between her and my sister. The next day, my sister and I compared stories, and we had both seen the same creature. Over the next few years we lived there, my sister and I ended up seeing that creature only one or two more times. I'll never forget how unsafe and scared I felt living in that house. It had to have been haunted. Next story. One day I stayed home from school because I was feeling sick. At the time I stayed at my aunt's house in Lawndale. It was a little old yellow house with a huge backyard. So anyway, I was laying on the couch sleeping while all of my cousins were getting ready for school. My aunt gave me some cereal to eat, but I didn't finish it all because my stomach was hurting. So I dumped the rest out in the sink, and inside there was a screen to catch food and stuff. Well, everyone left in a rush and I was left alone, and my aunt told me to call her if I needed anything. I slept for a couple of hours and I woke up and got the chills. I lay there on the couch and was just staring when I turned my head and noticed a ghost. She was walking into the bathroom and she wore a long white gown, almost like a nightgown, and she had really long black hair. I was so scared that I hid under the covers. I stayed under there for a while, but then finally got up. I walked into the kitchen to get something to eat when I noticed that the cereal that I had dumped in the sink drain was empty. My aunt didn't clean it out because she was already gone. Another time, my sister even saw the same girl I had seen. We were at the same house in Lawndale, and my mom was getting ready for work in the bathroom, putting makeup on. My sister and I were sitting on the couch when my sister asked my mom why she changed into a white dress. My mom walked out of the bathroom and asked what she was talking about, and my mom was wearing a black shirt. That's when I knew that house was haunted. So many things went on in that house. Another time, my cousin said he saw red demon eyes. They had two sets of bunk beds, and they were right next to each other. And when he woke up in the night, he saw two red eyes staring at him, and he slept on the top bunk. Next story. In November of 1992, I had just started a new job with an ambulance service in Bremont, Texas. In order to take the position, I was required to take courses in emergency medicine in order to pass the state certification for the position. My partner and I had to travel several miles to Rosebud, where the classes were held. On one occasion, I had my husband bring my two daughters to Rosebud to the classes. They volunteered to be our practice dummies for our practice lab on caring for small children and adolescents. My partner and I left for Rosebud for the classes, and my husband and daughters came later. After class was over, we started for home. My partner and I in one car, and my husband and daughters behind us in our pickup. It had been unusually warm that day, but when we came from the building, it had turned extremely cold, and it hadn't even gotten dark yet. As we drove along, my partner and I were talking, not really about anything in particular, just general conversation. Every now and then I would glance back to make sure my husband wasn't lagging behind, as he had a tendency to do. The road between Rosebud and Bremont is mostly isolated and deserted, as most country roads tend to be at night. We had just passed the country store outside of Rosebud and were well on our way home. I glanced back to make sure that my family was still behind us when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw an old woman standing at the side of the road. I thought that I was mistaken and took a second look to be sure of what I saw. The woman was dressed all in black. She had a long black dress and coat and had her head covered with a black shawl. I couldn't see her face because she was turned to the side. She also had a cane and was just standing there. However, she had no hands or feet. But you could tell that she was old because she was hunched over by age. I asked my partner if he saw the old woman on the other side of the road, and he said, "No, I must have seen a shadow or something because he would have seen it too if it was actually there." I dismissed it as just my eyes playing tricks on me. We arrived home and I was getting out of the car when my husband and daughters arrived. Both of my daughters were in hysterics and crying as they jumped out of the pickup. They grabbed onto me and wouldn't let go. I asked my husband what in the world was going on. He even had a strange look on his face, and he asked me if I'd seen the woman that was standing beside the road. I told him that I had seen her, but I was the only one in our car that actually had. I asked him if he knew her, and he said no, she was the ghost of a woman that had lived on that land a long time ago. The house that she had lived in and raised her family in was just across the road and now long abandoned. It was like a log cabin and in a very bad condition, but it was still visible from the road where we had seen her at. My husband knew the story of the lady as folklore around Rosebud, where he had spent most of his life, but this was the first time he had actually seen her. After several days, my family and I were visiting in Rosebud with some friends, artists and needy. We brought up the lady on the side of the road. They both looked at us and kind of laughed. Artist said that the lady was Needy's aunt and that we weren't the first ones to see her. In life, she would often walk the property, and she did so even in death. Needy said she guessed that her aunt loved the place so much that she refused to leave. We've never seen her again to this very day. However, we always look for her whenever we travel on that road. Next story. I was raised in Stratford, Connecticut, home to the legendary Phelps Mansion, reputed haunted house on Elm Street in that town. Being residents, we constantly heard stories about the place. Not believing in this stuff much, the stories were mostly ignored. One day, my high school best friend Larry and I decided to test our courage and bravery and enter the house. After some deliberation, we decided it would be the upcoming Friday night. We invited anyone else interested and daring enough to join us. There were no takers. Instead, people said we were crazy and would never do it. Now we were up to the challenge. Friday arrived, and we thought and talked about what was to take place that evening all day long, making sure neither Larry or myself would chicken out. Night fell and we were ready. Larry drove and we parked about a half mile away from the dark, partially dilapidated structure. Armed with only one flashlight between us, we made our approach. Even until this moment, I didn't let on about my latent fear, although the closer we got, the harder my heart pounded. We were no closer than 10 feet when suddenly, simultaneously, we both saw the backlit image of a man in one of the open ground level windows. In what seemed to be a literal split second, we found ourselves back at that car, barely being able to speak. Once we regained our composure, we asked the proverbial question: "Did you see what I saw?" We concurred, exchanged accounts, and never went back. To this day, we will never know what went on inside that place, save the legends found on the internet under the Stratford poltergeist. Next story. My name is Melissa, and right now I'm about 35 years old. My dad, Jerry, was a funeral director or slash mortician in Three Rivers, Texas, until I was about 18. So I grew up around death. Our home was across the street from the funeral home, and the cemetery was just across the highway, which was Highway 72. We had tombstones lining the edge of our front yard, for heaven's sake, or for sale, however you want to look at it. Anyway, I took a lot of remembering about being part of the Adams family and didn't have many friends wanting to sleep over, as you can guess. Now, don't let these clothes fool you. I've had ghostly experiences my whole life, not just at the funeral home house. This incident was the only threatening encounter. I was 12 years old, asleep in my bed, and awakened by a thirst so profound that I thought I might choke. I looked at my alarm clock, right past midnight. I thought about how strange it was. I never got up in the middle of the night for any reason. Nonetheless, I got out of bed, opened my bedroom door, and made my way in the darkness down the hall to the kitchen. I had a creepy feeling. Not that it bothered me, but it heightened my senses. Anyway, the kitchen floor was typically cool under my bare feet, which I liked. The fridge and the stand-up freezer were humming an electric duet. When I opened the harvest gold door, the fridge fairy kindly made light, and I grabbed the water jug. I stood there, fridge door wide open, water jug turned up to my mouth, and drank like I had just crossed the Mojave. I stopped to catch my breath, holding the jug in front of me with both hands when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. You know that feeling? When you know something or someone is right behind you? I was utterly frozen. I dared not take a breath. My ears were perking to hear any little sound. Then, "What are you doing in here?" I let my breath out, with much relief to my lungs. My body relaxed and I turned to face my dad. Too cool to let on that he scared the crap out of me, I answered. I was thirsty. He took the water from my still firm grip and said, "That's weird, me too." While discussing our strange awakenings, he got glasses from the cabinet, poured water into them, and I retreated to the dining room, turning the light on, before I sat at my mom's seat. He came and sat too at his usual seat at the head of the table, and we talked and drank our water. My dad and I kind of had an understanding about ghosts and things of the like, as we had both had encounters with the same ones over the years. We neither validated or dismissed a tale, and could talk about an incident with as much enthusiasm as discussing the weather. So there we sat at the dining room table, drinking our water and talking. As my dad spoke, my eyes were drawn to the wood shelf on the partition right behind him. It was something my dad had put up. Just two black metal brackets, a board across them covered with a lace dolly. It was just there to showcase some stupid crystal glassware that we had. I never really paid much mind, and I'm sure my dad thought that I was just trying to avoid eye contact by looking at it, but I couldn't pull my eyes away, and I couldn't even hear what my dad was saying to me. Just as quick as a flash, the shelf and all its holdings slid off the brackets and crashed to the floor beside my dad. I watched it happen, but although my mouth lay agape, I couldn't warn him to move. "What the?" my dad said. "We were picking up the mess," as I explained. I saw everything just slide off, and how amazing it was that not a single thing had actually hit my dad, seeing as the shelf was right above his head. My dad joked that the lady in the white dress must have wanted the seat. I agreed, and we concluded that it was better for us to go on to bed and let our grouchy apparition have the damn chair. We were sort of laughing about it, and as we got to the hallway, just as I switched off the dining room light, for some reason we both turned to look at the table, and there she sat. We just called her the white lady in white dress, mostly because we don't know her name, but we've all seen her moving up and down the hallway at night. My parents say she goes through the bedroom door, which is at the end of the hall. My dad thinks she looks like his mother, who died when I was about 2. She's an older looking woman with a full-length white dress, but I never got the feeling that she was my granny, just a nice lady that floated past my room at night making her rounds. In a weird kind of way, when I was small, I was comforted by the fact that she walked the halls. My idea was that if there was a ghost keeping an eye on me, the boogeyman wouldn't come around. Anyway, over the years, my dad and I have talked about that night several times and laughed. Honestly, I think we miss her. Next story. This happened to me when I was 12, when I met a spirit. My grandmother lives near the Rockies, almost on the border of Arapahoe National Park. I was visiting her for Christmas and stayed in her cabin along with my 2 cousins and my cat Sophie. The first strange thing happened to me on the second day of visiting. I was still unpacking with my back turned to the door of the guest room. I heard the door close, but when I turned around, it was wide open. I got spooked and nearly fell over. I peeked into the hall and saw nothing. I asked my grandmother why it happened, and she explained that her house was built near an Indian burial ground and that peculiar things regularly happened. She thought that a certain ghost was haunting her house. She said that the last person who owned it was a young man of about 35. She said that on a dark winter night he was driving home when the car slipped off the road and crashed. He was in the hospital but didn't make it. She thought he came back because he missed his home. I didn't believe her, thinking she was pulling my leg, but was I wrong? One night it was particularly cold and my cat was sleeping with me. It was around 1 a.m. and I woke up to find my cat staring out the window. I got up to see what she was staring at and was shocked to see a man standing in the snow looking up at the window. He waved at me and walked back into the forest. I grabbed my jacket and went after him. When I was outside, he already disappeared. I had a feeling my grandmother wasn't pulling my leg, but then that wasn't all. Me and my cousins were going on a hike through the forest and it was still snowing. Halfway through the trail, I wandered away toward the burial ground. When I got there, I only saw a clearing covered in snow. I turned around to find my cousins when I heard footsteps from behind me walking slowly through the snow. I turned around and saw something rustling in the bushes. A man emerged, looking pale and with a smile on his face. We stared at each other for a few moments until he politely asked, "Hey, could you help me?" He looked okay, and he led me to the road where a car was smoking fumes. It looked like it ran into a tree. "Is there anyone else you know around here who could help me?" he asked. I'm not sure. Follow me, maybe my cousins can help you." I led him back into the forest, the air still and silent. After about 50 minutes, we finally found the trail. My cousins were waiting for me, angry that I wandered off. "Well, this guy needs help," I said. I turned to show him to them, but he was gone. I looked in disbelief. "Yeah, right," my cousin said when I went back, but only found my footprints and nothing else. But I could still hear him walking behind me when I found the trail. He just disappeared from sight, just like that. Next story. The 15-year-old house I lived in for most of my life has no eerie look to it. No one has died in the house, and as far as I know, there is no obvious reason why it should be haunted. Yet, in the quiet, I could hear things. My name being called, footsteps and drawers opening and closing. My brother once told me of a time when he saw feet running at the top of the stairs. He said the feet had on moccasins. I have plenty of stories to share about this house, but there is one that sticks out most. I don't believe it has to do with ghosts, rather demons that I encountered. I was 13. My great-grandmother had passed just a few months before, and I was thinking about her. She was a Christian and taught me about God and angels. Whenever I think about her, I think of angels. So that particular night I decided to pray. I prayed to be able to see my guardian angel that night. When I prayed, my breath got short. I crawled into bed and tried to sleep. Then something crawled into bed with me, something I couldn't see, but I could feel it, and it was disturbing. The side of my bed had dipped in, and the blanket sort of welted up as if a body was under it. I had this bad feeling, but I kept telling myself it had to be my angel. I felt next to me. It was ice cold. I never felt so cold in my life. Half my body was cold, the other side room temperature. I decided to hold the angel's hand, and my hand became tingly and numb, so I began to rub my hands together. Now this will sound crazy, but it's true. I noticed my hand that was in the cold spot had grown 2 inches longer. I checked and checked to see if it was right. It was. I turned my light on and looked over at some of my pictures around my room. They were all moving their mouths at once, saying the same thing, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. It was some sort of chant, though. And then there was this doll that was sitting on my dresser, slowly turning toward me, and suddenly its face turned gray. It was seriously demonic, and I stayed up the rest of that night. Next story. This happened around 1989. I was about 10 years old. My mom had moved us to this huge home in Rochester, Pennsylvania. This home had 7 bedrooms, a sitting room, 3 bathrooms, 1 huge living room, 1 huge dining room, and the biggest kitchen I've ever seen in my entire life. The day we moved into this house, I was bringing in a box to put in the dining room. When I first walked on the porch, I got the sense that something was in that house. I took the box in the house and I felt someone in the room with me. The hair on the back of my neck stood on end. I dropped the box and took off running out of there. As time went on, things got a bit strange. Lights started turning off and on by themselves. The normal haunting you would experience in a house that used to be a funeral home. Yes, this home was a funeral home years before we moved into it. After a month or so of things turning off and on, we started hearing people, not one, but more than one, walking around in the attic. We heard scratching on the floor upstairs in the attic, as if someone were taking a rake and running it across the floor. The attic door locked on our side of it, so we knew nobody was in there. We never unlocked that door. Then another time after that, my sister was taking a bath, and being afraid of being in the bathroom alone, I was in there sitting on the toilet with her, when the sink across the bathtub turned on by itself. We got so freaked out we went screaming out of the bathroom. A lot more happened after that. It was like things got worse. My mom and stepdad worked, so they picked us up every day after school. We would go home to all the furniture being moved around. No kidding. The living room couch would be in the middle of the floor. We all thought that maybe somebody was coming in and doing it, but why would they be doing it on a daily basis? Around the last month we lived there, it was in the middle of the night. I heard someone crying. I opened my eyes, and there was a man sitting on my bed holding his head. He looked, and it sounded like he was crying. I asked, "Are you okay?" And he disappeared. I told my mom about it. She blew it off like I was imagining things. Then a few weeks later, I came home and my mom was freaking out. She was packing up the house. She said, "I don't care if we don't know where we're going. We are getting the heck out of here." Something had happened to her to freak her out. She told me just recently that she had taken the day off of work because she was ill. She was sleeping and woke up and heard sounds in the living room. She went in to check and see if someone was in the house. She looked in the living room and saw a man moving the couch. She screamed to get out and he disappeared. By the end of that week, we had moved out of that house. I tried to do some research on that house, but only came to a dead end. I still seem to move into houses that have things happen in them. I don't know if a spirit is following me or if I'm just attracted to houses with spirits in them. Whatever the case may be, I have not yet been as scared as I was back then. I hope it never happens again. Next story. The place is Richmond Bridge, Tasmania, Australia, and the time is 1997. There are many stories of ghosts from where I used to live, being such a place where many poor souls were sentenced to rotten cells for the remainder of their lives. This is not such a story of mine. I recently read a book about spooking going on in my country, and I was shocked to see that there's a story of a black ghost dog that walks across the oldest bridge in Australia. Now, I have been to Richmond many times, and on a few occasions I would see a black dog walking near and on the bridge. The legend states that the dog is supposed to walk along people while crossing the bridge and to vanish into thin air on the other side. There are also two other ghosts that frequent the bridge that I have seen. One is that of a man with a walking stick who crosses the bridge and disappears, and also of the bridge supervisor, a former convict at the time surveying the work on the bridge. It is said that this supervisor lived off other people's miseries until one foggy day two convicts, fed up with him, attacked the supervisor and then threw him over the bridge. Dying of injuries during the fall, the ghost is said to still survey the bridge and is mostly seen when the fog rolls in.